One day you're writing a blog telling the rest of the world how safe and amazing it is and how wonderful all the people are. And then the next day you're dead. This is possible. You could get hit by a car by accident or by a drunk driver. And although it's not likely, but you could get kidnapped or murdered. So I just made a video about all the reasons why you should bike around the world. And I still think you should. But just be aware of some of the hardships that you'll endure and some of the risks you're taking, and maybe this can change some of these negative outcomes. Because you're going to have to be able to tolerate a lot of diversity. The weather's going to be really bad, and you're going to have to push your bike uphill in the cold wind and rain and headwinds. Your bike's going to have problems like flat tires and broken spokes and things. You're going to get chased by dogs, annoyed by, the village idiot or some drunk people. If you're going on a trip for several years, you're going to be away from your friends and family for a long time and not have a great social life. Just a lot of daily small talk with people. And of course, you're going to get sick from time to time from like food poisoning or dengue fever or malaria. And you're also not going to have your comfort foods. You're just going to have to eat what's there in that country. And of course, the traffic could be insane in some areas. And, you could get hit by a car. I've had that happen to me twice. And then, of course, there's the worst option, which is, you could get killed or kidnapped. And this is, it doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. So I'll talk about some of the basic difficulties of traveling on bike, and then I'll go into the worst case scenarios. So the first thing you have to deal with is, a lot of different weather. Sometimes it's going to be freezing. Sometimes it's going to be really hot. I think heat stroke is probably a bigger concern than the cold weather. So you got to make sure, you've got plenty of water. I usually drink a liter before I even start going for the day. And you just got to make sure you pay attention to these things, take breaks several times a day. Or, some people even get up super early and go at like 5, 6 a.m. until like 10, 11 o'clock, and they don't even bike the whole afternoon. And then they'll go like later in the day in really hot areas. Hypothermia could be a issue. If you get really cold and wet or something like that. I don't hear about this happening too much of cyclists, probably because most of the time, we could go back down the mountain or find shelter or wave down like a car or someone in the road. But it can happen, especially for runners, hikers, and climbing. There was a marathon a couple years ago in China, in Gansu province, and it was, pretty high elevation there. I've been out in that area before, and 21 people died of hypothermia. So it definitely happens, and maybe have a safety blanket or something like that with you, just in case. I know I've been in an area where I had shorts on and the weather wasn't too bad. Like, it was a little cold, and 20 minutes later it snowed when I was in Tibet. We went over to an abandoned house, basically, and with a bunch of sheep, and kind of hung out there for a little bit. Luckily, it wasn't cold rain, but that happens a lot. I'm in Colorado now. People go up and hike these peaks, and it might be hot in Denver. They don't realize when they get up to the top of a peak, they get hit with rain, and it might be 35 degrees, and hypothermia only takes 12 minutes. You could die. Usually it takes a little longer, but yeah, so be careful of that kind of stuff. So headwinds are brutal, and a really unpleasant surprise. I remember when I biked across the U.S., I went through the Rockies, and when you get to eastern Colorado and Kansas, it's just completely flat. And I thought I was going to bust out like, 150 or 200 mile days, and it was like 50 mile per hour headwinds. It was like I was going about 5 miles per hour, and it was so demoralizing mentally because I just went through all these tough mountain areas, and it's like you get to a flat area and it's even harder in a way. At least when you're in the mountains, you have the views at least that are nice. But yeah, in a flat area like that, I could just see the silo for like the farms in the next town or whatever, like 5-10 miles away, and it just seemed like it took forever. So yeah, headwinds are brutal. So, and obviously rain's annoying. I don't think I ever really enjoy rain, regardless of the temperature. And it's also kind of dangerous in my opinion, because I don't think that people have always great window wipers. So you could just imagine that if someone really can't see you, obviously you could get hit by a car. So I wouldn't encourage people to go in rainy weather if you don't have to. So the other thing is about your social life. I'd say that's over for the most part. Not totally. I mean, if you're going with a friend or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or, when you get to either touristy places or bigger cities and you meet other tourists, it's pretty nice. And you meet all these super nice people in little villages and towns, but, there's obviously limited English, generally speaking, and they ask you the same questions. Where are you from? How old are you? are you married? I mean, I remember when I was in India or somewhere where, generally speaking, especially in a bigger town, there's a lot of people know English. And I mean, it was just like, I just got these questions like, 20 times in 10 minutes, it was just all day long in certain areas. So you're not going to have the deepest philosophical conversations with people, especially if there's no English, which is often the case in like, Central Asia or Latin America. And even if you are in a place where people have good English in like Africa in some places or India, it doesn't always mean like little villages, the English is still quite low. So you really aren't going to be able to have a lot of deep conversations a lot of the time. Although it's nice that you'll be in some situations where people take you into their home, but in some ways that's bad too, because like you don't always want to like entertain people or have small talk with people if you can't converse. So although they're being really friendly and it's a great experience, if you do it a lot of the time, you can get tired of it. Like sometimes I just want to go to a hotel at the end of a long, day. If I'm super hot or super tired, I don't even want to necessarily stay with people. So you're going to run into some village idiots from time to time and some drunk people, whether you're in like a restaurant or a bar or whatever. And so, yeah, you could just be having lunch in, the middle of the day and some guy's just been drinking all day and you just can't shake them off. Like, oh, where are you from? What are you doing? And they're just, they might want to follow you around or hang out or offer you to go with them somewhere. And so, I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but just definitely once in a while. So you're going to be uncomfortable sitting in a saddle all day. It's not like it's comfortable sitting on a bike for 8 hours a day. Your ass is going to hurt. You're going to get chafings, especially when it's hot. Like it's pretty unavoidable. Now, on a recumbent bike, I haven't ridden one. It does look a lot more comfortable, especially because you don't have the back pain. On most bikes, you're leaning over all day. But I think that's probably more dangerous because people can't see you. You're a lot lower to the ground. So I'm not sure the statistics on that. I know that those bikes are super fast, especially on flat areas, but it might be more dangerous. The novelty of travel eventually wears off. It's super fun at the beginning, just like anything else you do. Maybe even if you start a new job, a new sport, or you move to a new city. It's great for the first few weeks or maybe even the first few months, but if you're going on a world tour for several years, I mean, it becomes more like a job and mentally, it can be really tough. I remember when I first started off, I started in Thailand and I got into Cambodia, so I was only about 3 weeks on the road and I think it was a French couple or from Belgium or something, and they've been going for 3-4 years and I was super excited. I'm like, oh, where are you from? They're like, oh, where'd you go? And I went, and I was like, oh man, I just got Thailand. I'm all excited. And they're like, yeah, I've been going 3 years. Yeah, it's good. You could just tell they were over it, which, you got to consider too, if you want to even continue, if you're not really enjoying it. I think people probably should just go a few months at a time or maybe a year and then take a break or something. But I understand not everyone can do that. So you're going to have a lot of bike trouble. Obviously, you have a really nice bike, that helps, but you're still going to get flat tires and broken spokes all the time. You can get Kevlar tires, which are less likely to puncture, so I would invest in those, and I would get heavy-duty spokes. But those are the two main issues, and then, of course, you'll have other issues with the wires for your derailleur and all this stuff breaks from time to time, or for your brakes. And brakes and stuff aren't too hard to change, but you might want to learn some basic mechanical skills. Usually you can if it's anything major, you can usually find a bike shop eventually, but you're going to want to know the basics for sure. So you're generally not staying in the nicest hotels or the most expensive restaurants, right? So, especially if you're on a budget. So yeah, some of these cheap hotels, or even if you stay with people, I've stayed with people with some really, really pretty dirty. Let's just say I definitely wouldn't want to live there. Or you're out camping, but yeah, it's not always comfortable in these kind of places, with mosquitoes, or it's too hot and there's no fan, or it rains all night and you get wet inside your tent or something like that. So it's definitely not like your bed at home. And also the same thing with food. You're not getting all your comfort food all the time. You're going to eat what's there, and what's there might not always be that great. Luckily, I'm not a picky guy with food, but I know a lot of people are real picky. And I mean, it's like you should learn to be more tolerant with what you eat, because it's you're not going to get the best things all the time. So now it's cheaper than other ways of traveling, but it's not super cheap if you're going to do it for 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure with all this inflation how much it would be, but I used to think maybe $1,000 a month. You probably would need 1,500 or 2,000 a month, depending on what country. So yeah, 10, 20 grand for a year or two at least. So you're going to have to save up a lot of money for this. So the road themselves, I mean, a lot of the time you've got nice tarmac. Sometimes it's a little bumpy and you've got some potholes, but other times, I mean, you're going to be on some really bad roads that are like either super muddy. So in Tibet, I had these like washboard dirt roads that were super bad because, you know, you're just shaking all day as you go over these things. So it's definitely not very fun. So, and you know, you're just going to have random crappy things happen. Like it rains all night and all your stuff gets wet in your tent. Maybe you had a journal or your camera or your iPhone or something gets destroyed, or maybe some kids steal your phone or something like that. So you're going to have things happen, like you're going uphill all day and you finally are about to get to the top and then you get a flat tire, and then you change your flat tire and you go up a little more and you have a broken spoke, or you found out you were on the wrong road and you have to go all the way back. You made a mistake. And so it's really mentally tough. You know, you're going to be away from your family for a long time and your friends, and you're just going to deal with really tough situations. You're going to be alone with the same thoughts in your head all day. I mean, for me, that's tough. So now I'll move on to some of the worst case scenarios. So some of the worst things that can happen is getting in a bike accident, which might be your fault of your own. It might not be because of like another motorist or anything like that. So I'd encourage people, don't go so fast down the road. I've seen some people just fly down the road. I'm like, it's not a race. So you could take your time and be careful, because yeah, there's some huge potholes and things like that you won't expect, or people pull out in front of you. I know, especially on my motorcycle trips, you know, in China, a lot of time people pull out without looking. And I've almost slammed into tractors and stuff all the time because of that. So yeah, be careful on your own. You don't want to get hurt doing that. I've had some friends get hurt in motorcycle accidents too, so it's not fun. So the big thing is you're much more likely to get hit by a car, especially from what I've seen the last few years. I'm not sure why, but there's no doubt that people are on their smartphones. And to be honest, like, I mean, how many cars pass you each day? 100, 1,000? So if 100 cars pass you a day, that's 36,500 bikes over a year, at least. How many of those people are playing on their phones? How many of those people just came from a wedding or a bar in the afternoon and they've been drinking all day? DUI laws are pretty non-existent in many developing countries. And even in developed countries or most places, I mean, if you're in the countryside in the middle of nowhere, like there's just not like police out there like regulating every person driving around. So that's a lot of drunk people probably that pass you. There's a good chance hundreds, if not thousands of people pass you each year that are drunk or on their phones. Like there was this American guy, Ron McGarity, who was on a world cycling trip. I think he had gone back and forth since 95. And in 2014, he was in Russia cycling for peace, and he got hit by a drunk driver. So I saw he was on a recumbent bike. I'm not sure if that increased his chance of getting hit, but regardless, he got hit by a drunk driver. This guy, Mike Hall, was an ultra endurance rider, and he was hit in Australia. Guy didn't see him. The only thing I could take from this is, make sure you have good reflective or bright clothing. He's got mostly black on. So make sure you've got, either some of these flags or some things to increase your chances of people seeing you. I would encourage wearing a helmet, of course. Now, I actually never wore a helmet doing my travels, but I would still encourage you to do so. So, and then this goes on to the next point. So I've been hit by a car not just once, but twice on my world journey. I was hit in China. A guy was driving on the opposite side of the road in the middle of nowhere near Tibet. He hit me head on. My face broke the windshield. I broke my femur. He hit another guy on the side of the road. I'm not sure if he was on his phone or fighting with his wife or what happened, but I had to get surgery on my femur. I was in the hospital in Kunming for a month. I could put a link to the video up here, or you could look below. I already made a video about that about a year and a half ago or so. And then about a year and a half later, I recovered and continued on. And then in Kyrgyzstan, I got hit by a taxi driver. Kind of was in the middle of nowhere, same kind of situation. So it wasn't a busy area. And I was crossing the road. And, I was listening to my iPod, and I was kind of casual about it because there was no one around, and I'm kind of like, well, people could see me. I mean, there's no one out here. And I did see him, and I got off the road. I was like, holy shit, this guy came out of nowhere, and he hit my back tire. And luckily, I wasn't severely injured, but that could have been really bad. So you really got to be careful out there. I got another link for that story. I just did that one a couple months ago. So getting kidnapped, is it very possible? Probably not super possible, but it does happen. I had gone through Syria to Lebanon around 2009 or so. And then about a year and a half later, there was 7 Estonians who were kidnapped at that border. And luckily they were released 4 months later. But I mean, if that was 7 Americans, very good chance they might have been killed. I saw a story of a Chinese guy who was kidnapped in Pakistan and was held for a whole year. Just a few days ago in the news, there was an aid worker in Africa who was kidnapped for 6 years by ISIS and some terrorist. So he wasn't cycling, but he got taken right from his home. And yeah, 6 years is a long time. So now I'll go into a couple stories of cyclists who lost their lives under brutal circumstances. So this story was brutal of these 2 guys in Mexico who were killed. This guy, Holger Hagenbusch from Germany and Krzysztof Komelski from Poland, were found murdered. Well, they were found dead, and they tried to make up a story and said that they drove off a cliff by accident or something. Actually, there wasn't even cliffs there. It wasn't until like one of the guy's brother went and visited and basically saw his brother had been shot in the back of the head, and the other guy was decapitated and his foot was cut off. And so these guys have been going for like 3 or 4 years around the world, so they're experienced cyclists. And I think they were basically finishing their trip. Like after they went to Mexico, they're going to go up to the United States and maybe Canada or something, and probably were about to end their 3 or 4 year trip in just a matter of 2 or 3 months. And I have no idea what happened in this situation because they never found the people. But yeah, what a brutal thing could happen. I mean, you'd never think this would happen to a cyclist. Like, I mean, what would they steal? Like a camera or a couple basic things? I mean, it's just insane. Now, I did look in the comments section. One guy mentioned maybe a guy had, maybe they were like in a restaurant or a bar, and maybe one of the guy was like hitting on a girl, and those guys got revenge. But I don't know, it doesn't seem like that would be that realistic to me. But yeah, I have no idea what happened to those poor guys. And then this other story of Jay Austen and Laura Gagan was awful. 2 Americans who were killed, and then another person from the Netherlands, Rien Woke, and Marcus Hummel from Switzerland was also killed. And then there was 3 other Europeans with them. So yeah, a brutal situation, and kind of brought a lot of controversy because, a lot of Jay and Lauren's writings, one of the quotes was like, badness exists, sure, but even that's quite rare. By and large, humans are kind, self-interested sometimes, myopic sometimes, but kind, generous and wonderful and kind. No greater revelation has come from our journey than this. So, I totally agree with that aspect. I think that's true. 99% of the people are good. They also had a couple other things that, stood out, like evil is a make-believe concept. And so people were really brutal in the comments saying that's what they get. These idiots should never have gone to Tajikistan. Like this is where terrorists are and all this kind of stuff. And I've cycled through a lot of countries in that area, like Pakistan, and I've been through Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and a lot of like Middle East or Muslim countries in general. And the people are great. Probably 99% or 99.9% of the people are good. But there is that small percentage that's bad. And in this case, 5 guys who, they look like they're in their 20s or early 30s, stopped at a gas station, and, and they asked him, kind of interrogating a bit, because the one guy knew good English, and he's like, what do you think of the country? How is it here? And he was asked where are you from? And it seemed like the guy didn't come off as like real friendly, kind of a little off, and Jay Austen, responded, I guess, I'm an American or whatever like that, and they got down the road a bit, and there's even footage of it that someone had. And the guys in the car hit a few of the cyclists and then got out of the car and stabbed them and killed 4 of them. And luckily, the 2 others were injured and survived. And then this one French guy was a little further back. Luckily for them, they didn't get injured or anything like that. So absolutely just super brutal. It's super rare to have something like that, but it's certainly possible. So here are kind of some of my thoughts on some of these things. You know, in the case of these guys in Mexico, was there anything they could have done? I mean, I doubt it. People probably pulled up with a gun, and I'm sure there wasn't much you could do, right? I mean, of course, you can't even bring a gun on a trip, right? Because you can't cross a bunch of borders with a gun, and I know most people wouldn't want to bring one anyway. You know, a knife or something, I mean, I doubt that would be a lot of help either. And of course, I don't even know if most people could use a gun or a knife, even if they wanted to. You know, I'm sure stabbing or shooting someone isn't most people's cup of tea. What I could say, though, is that probably having something like pepper spray or mace or whatever, or bear spray or something, you know, check the laws in the country you're going to. I had that, not on all my travels, but I did have it when I biked across the U.S., and that could be good for dogs, too, if you were chased or something like that, or even if someone's drunk or being obnoxious or you're assaulted, especially if like you're a female or something, and, you know, a guy advances on you. I would definitely have like something like pepper spray. You know, could that have saved these guys in Tajikistan? I don't know. You know, I mean, they were obviously hit by a car and, you know, knocked off their bikes. And so it's not going to be easy to get into your bags. You know, I've been hit by a car. It's not like you just get up and grab your stuff. But if you are in a country where, you know, ISIS was still around at that time, and ironically, the Dutch couple who went through Tajikistan to avoid Afghanistan thinking it was safe. And ironically, like these five guys have been going around Tajikistan just looking for foreigners. So there are some bad people out there. And should some of us have that conversation where we say, hey, you know what? What will we do if we ever have this kind of thing happen? Because you know what? Maybe, like, let's say everyone did have mace and they were able to blind some of those guys. One of the people sprayed mace at them. It might have delayed it for a little longer where maybe someone else came up to a car and stopped them. Who knows? And so I would say at minimum, consider something like that and at least have that conversation like, you know, what are we going to do if we get hit by a car? What are we going to do if, you know, someone confronts us like that? And I'm sure these guys have never thought of it. They're just like, everyone's good. There's nothing going to happen. And this gets into an even more important question. Should you say you're an American if you're traveling or like from wherever you're at? Now, in this case, of course, these people were probably more looking for Americans. Now, they possibly might have did the same thing if they just said they were from Lithuania or whatever, but they were probably targeting Americans. In my experience, I generally did say I was an American, and the reason why I did so is because I think a lot of us just want to get a reaction from people and see that they are going to be positive, you know, generally speaking. Now, of course, there was a couple times where, I don't know, something felt off with someone. I think maybe it was in Pakistan or somewhere else, and I maybe said something else. But I wouldn't be quite as stubborn with that these days. I mean, like, you already get the idea after you've traveled for months and months that, like, people are nice and people are cool. I don't think you should risk your life necessarily saying something like that because you could have endangered the other people you're with. Like maybe if they were all from, let's say, Eastern Europe or something or wherever, and they didn't say they were American, maybe they would have not pursued them, possibly, right? Like they let those 7 guys that were held for a few months. So I think it's okay if you say where you're from in most circumstances, but if you're with some other strangers or something like that, you don't even have to say you're from Canada. You could always say like something fictional or something like that. Like, you know, I remember one guy had just said, oh, I'm from Mozambique. And a lot of the time he just didn't want to tell people he was from France because people were like, oh, France, and they'd talk for 5 minutes. And he just wasn't really in the mood to talk about that. So he'd say Mozambique. No one really in Cambodia or Tajikistan probably knows a lot about Mozambique or Tanzania or something like that, or Uruguay. And so that could have actually been something that saved their life. So I think that's also something you definitely should think about on these trips. If you're in these areas where there's a slight possibility of someone coming up, something kind of strange like that, you know, and even if you don't want to say Mozambique, make up a fictional country. You know, I'm from Wakanda or something like that. It might have saved a few people's lives. And it's not just cycling. I mean, any way you travel, you can have issues where you get killed or something like that. You know, I saw this one hitchhiker a few years ago. He had been going around the world for 5 years. He's from Canada. He was about to go home within the next month or two, and he got hit by a car in Africa somewhere. And so, yeah, really sad story. And another girl was using Couchsurfing, which is a site that you use to try to find like a local you could stay with in their home. And they were staying in a room that like, it was just like a tiny room. So they're not in the same bed, but it's the same room in a small area. And who knows, maybe the guy tried to pull on some moves, things didn't work out, and I don't know, he wanted to go ahead with it anyway, and then he doesn't want her to say anything, and, ends up killing her. They're not sure exactly what happened with that situation. It seemed like, he brutally murdered her, apparently. And so these things happen. So there's this other story of this Italian girl whose father was pretty famous as an artist, and she wore a wedding dress and wanted to hitchhike through the Middle East to promote peace. And so she left and started hitchhiking through Italy, and she got into Turkey, and a guy picked her up and ended up killing her. So all I'm saying is that, some of these things are just stuff you should think about. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I still think you should go out there and do it, and don't let all these naysayers and people who are negative prevent you from traveling the world, whether on bike or hitchhiking. Just be aware that there's some bad people out there, and anything you could do to try to prevent it if possible. So I'll have some more videos on this kind of concept about cycling and hiking, so look out for that. And I've got a lot of other things on my channel from when I lived in China for 10 years and taught and did tours, commercial fishing in Alaska, hiking the Appalachian Trail, etc. So like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.